So welcome to this final session of this year's Asia Fruit Congress. Time has really flown by, and now we've got the next 30 minutes where we're going to be talking about, well, I suppose the biggest issue of the day, which is COVID and the new shape of Asia's trade post the pandemic. May the pandemic disappear as quickly as possible, as quickly as it came. And this pandemic has caused all sorts of disruptions, all sorts of challenges, all sorts of opportunities have come out of the pandemic, and that's what we want to explore for the next 30 minutes or so. Now, of course, you can take part. It's very, very important that you do. So all you need to do is get out your mobile phone or turn on your laptop and go to your browser and enter the domain name slido.com, SLIDO.com, and then you'll find a hashtag trade, TRADE, and there you can post your questions, which my colleague John is moderating. So I'll be looking for your questions to come up. They can come up on the screen here in front of me. And on the screen in front of me, I see my four excellent speakers. We're going to be joined, well, from everywhere around the world this morning. We've got Wayne Prowse, who will be speaking to us in a moment to give us some of the statistical overview. Wayne runs his own business called Fresh Intelligence Consulting and is joining us from the beautiful city of Sydney in Australia, where I think it's probably getting on for, well, late in the evening there now, Wayne. We're also joined by Connor Mu, who runs the import side at Joying Mao and joining us from Shenzhen in the south of China. And then from the wonderful city of Bangkok, where the city that never sleeps and where there are traffic jams all day and every day, by Wipiwi Watcharakon of Vashamon Food. And then, of course, last but not least, my friend and sparring partner over many, many years, Sharif Carvajal of the Chilean Fresh Fruit Exporters Association, who's joining us from his home in Casablanca in Morocco. So there we are. The internet takes us all over the world. And just to remind you, I'm sitting in London, England. So let's, we've got a load of things we want to get through in the next half hour. There's a lot to talk about, but I'd like Wayne to kind of set up the statistical. We need to base ourselves on facts, and let's look at some of the facts. And let's hear from Wayne. Wayne, over to you.
Good afternoon. I was only speaking to a colleague recently about how interesting it is to be a market analyst at this time. We're going to have a look today at the trade pattern of fresh fruit through the Asian markets, particularly the impact of what's happening in the last 6 months. Now, firstly, a comparison of the total trade by index going into Asia compared with the US and Europe. And you can see here that over the last 10 years, since the 2008 global financial crisis, which was the last major shock in the supply chain, Europe has increased about 1%. The US has increased about 8% per year over the decade, while in Asia, it's increased around 12% in both North Asia and Southeast Asian countries. Now, if we look at the similar metrics, going forward using the moving annual total to June 2020, you can see some changes here. Europe has actually kicked up by 8%. The US has been much the same, while in Asia, North Asian markets have dropped about 3.8%. And Southeast Asian countries have dropped by about 3.3%. Now, this is quite significant because last year China alone increased by 20%. So to be down this year is significant. Now, just to add context to what we're talking about with the Asian countries, North Asian countries, mainly Japan and China, they're 75% of the Asian trade. And 25% of the Asian trade is through Southeast Asian countries. And also to be aware that around 80% of the total trade is intra-Asian trade, and the remainder coming from Southern Hemisphere and Northern intercontinental markets from the US or from Europe. Now, looking at the importers' movements for the January to June 2020 versus January to June 2019, and see the impact of changes. And here we see that China is down 8% compared to the same period last year. Now, bearing in mind China was up 20% by December last year, year on year, so down 8% this year. Mainly due to fewer bananas coming in from the Philippines and also less citrus coming in from Egypt. Certainly the logistics in handling the volumes of fruit in China during the COVID period was a challenge and impacted these results. South Korea also was down 9% to 481,000 tonnes. And this was pretty much across the whole board, with most fruits being lower, although cherries was 4% higher. But then again, most cherries were already in by the end of January. Now, contrast, Japan, the other very large importer, was up 1%, just marginally 1% to 1.2 million tonnes, with very little change noted. In fact, oranges were up 10%. Taiwan increased 4% to 142,000 tonnes. Thailand was 15% higher as far as importing 304,000 tonnes, mostly apples and pears from China, but they had fewer grapes and citrus. China, again, the main supplier. Malaysia was 2% lower, again, similar volumes of apples and pears coming in from China and fewer grapes and mandarins. To the exporters now, and again, China in the last 6 months has powered ahead, is up 26% compared to the 6 months last year. This is mostly apples and pears, as well as grapes and stone fruit, and mostly exporting to other Asian countries. Notably, the Philippines has dropped about 10%, and that's mostly apples, The Philippines has dropped about 10%. That is mostly bananas and some pineapples going to China and Japan and some other Asian countries. Thailand was 17% lower, but some big swings there because Thailand's increase in durians was some 43%, but they also dropped a lot in longans. Vietnam gained 11%. Vietnam's gains were mostly to do with dragon fruit, and you might recall last year dragon fruit was down, so they've almost returned to where they were. But significantly this year, Vietnam has sent a lot more bananas into China, partially offsetting the drop in bananas that were coming from the Philippines. Malaysia dropped about 9% to 113,000 tonnes, and a lot of the Malaysian fruit with melons going into Singapore. And that's one area where we can really see the impact of COVID-19 on the demand for food service products where a lot of melons are used. So we're seeing that as a major impact. So in summing up, yes, there's been definitely a downturn in the last 6 months, but it's not catastrophic and the fundamentals remain. The tropical fruit from the Southeast Asian markets will continue to move north into the North Asian markets, supplemented by more tropical fruits coming across from Central American markets to top that up. The temperate fruits in big volumes will continue to flow from China to the Southeast Asian markets, supplemented by temperate fruits from Southern Hemisphere. We see that the intercontinental trade in the Northern Hemisphere, that's from Europe and the US into Asia, will continue to be sluggish, and it's mainly going to be niche suppliers in that area when it's supplying into the market that's similar product ranges. The Southern Hemisphere fruit from Chile, Australia, New Zealand, Peru and so forth, that is supplying the counter-seasonal temperate fruit into the North Asian markets, and we see that continuing. So I don't see that COVID is going to change the fundamentals.
So, as ever, the statistics kind of tell the story, really. And that's what I want now to explore with our fabulous panel that we've collected here from around the world, as we've said, from Sydney, Bangkok, from Shenzhen, and from the beautiful city of Casablanca in Morocco, to talk about these issues. And as I said earlier, you can join us on Slido. Just enter the password trade, and you can come in and ask as many questions as you want to, and I'll try and include them in the next 29 minutes and 42 seconds that we have left for our discussion. I'd like to try and group the discussion. There are so many things to talk about into kind of 4 key areas: distribution and supply, the situation and outlook in China and Thailand, the impact on retail consumers and marketing, and then to look at the end about trade and business. So I think that kind of covers absolutely every single thing, and I think there's going to be no shortage of things to discuss over these next 30 minutes or so. Just on the question about why, as it were, the numbers that Wayne talked to us about a moment ago, they showed an increase in Europe and the United States, and a fall off in Asia. And from what I understand from speaking to John Hay and the editors at Asiafruit, a lot of this is due essentially to the different formats, the different way people buy fruits and vegetables in these different areas, in these different countries. I know here shopping in London, and I've been traveling to my supermarket once a week, if not often more, and all my purchasing has been at the supermarket. In Asia, so much of the purchasing that goes on is done at the wholesale markets through the traditional retail, wet markets, street markets, and so on. And they were very badly affected by restrictions and closures. So let's look first about how these channels have been affected and what's been the impact on the market today and moving forward. If I could come to you, Connor, first in Shenzhen. Okay. We heard from Wayne about how the China market's been off, lower volumes in the last several months, and you guys are now out of COVID. But come back to that moment of when you're in the pandemic. You personally, your family, were you shopping at the supermarkets always, or were you using the wet markets just as much as you used to?
No, we actually didn't do anything. We just sit at home and order everything order everything from online, because that moment, from business wise, that all the major trading markets were shut down. All the supermarkets were really panicked, and those food shops were not allowed to open. So shopping malls were not allowed to open. So actually, we didn't really have many places to go anyhow. So that is really happened when back to February and March.
And Connor, was that an experience that was shared by your colleagues and your family and your friends? Everybody was shopping online, were they?
Yeah, it's actually the case. I would really say probably 99% of my colleagues ordered everything online. Also, back to that period, we have a lot of restrictions about traveling, and even we had a lot of restrictions of how to go to the office, how frequent, and who can go and who cannot. Yes. So by March, we start to have switches, maybe half today and half next day. We only really opened the office by April. So over that period, most of my colleagues, my friends, and my families are really buying everything from online.
But I know that Shenzhen is it's the Silicon Valley, if you can say it that way. It's the tech hub of China. Yes. So I can imagine everybody. You guys do everything online. When you go to the far west of the country or the far north, or you go to Chengdu and so on, and I know that Joy Wing Mao is all over the country. Were you detecting that kind of purchasing behavior across China, or was it something that was really in these big cities, the online purchasing?
It's actually happening everywhere, because online business has been developing very quickly through these recent years. It's not just like the biggest ones like JD.com or Alibaba. There are actually so many of them, everywhere of them. So actually it's happening across whole China, even back to my hometown where you cannot find on the map. Date also.
Well, I'd like to ask, and we can talk later about, how things will go forward. Will you guys continue shopping online in future? But I'd like first to just go back to that period of the crisis, and I know the crisis kind of exists at different time periods all over the world, but generally speaking, if we could look at that period in the pandemic, and I come to you, Sharif, in Chile. Asia's a hugely important market for you. China's a massive market for you. You see this drop-off that Wayne talked about. You must have been rather worried in Chile, I expect, about this drop-off and how long it would last.
Yes, I think like everybody in the industry, this was a completely unexpected challenge. Every season is a challenge for our growers and exporters, but this was a very big challenge. We were very closely monitoring the situation. Luckily, we have very good partners in all these main key markets in Asia who kept us up to date in regards to the situation on the ground, which was very important. And we saw, obviously, there was a period, especially during the cherry season, during the late part of the season, that obviously sales became very, very slow. And I would say that was not only because of the retail issues, but also because there was a lack of workers, both at a logistical level, at the port level. So the whole supply chain just got slower and slower and slower, given the fact that workers were not able to freely move about. Yes, and I think this affected not only China, but other markets such as South Korea, etc. So yes, it was a difficult time, but today I would say we're cautiously optimistic.
Just cautiously optimistic.
We're cautiously optimistic because why? At the end of the day, if you go back to this period of March all the way up to August, I would say the main key word here for Chilean fresh fruit exports is continuity. Yeah. At no moment in time during this whole pandemic have we stopped exporting. Yeah. Our oranges, our pears, our grapes, our blueberries, etc. They've been flowing from Chile to the Asian market and to all the world without major difficulties. For example, just this season, we opened up our exports to the Chinese market for citrus. And that was a very positive experience.
That's good to hear. Let's go to Bangkok and hear from Wipawee Wacharakon. Wipawee, Thailand's a hugely important market, and you're a hugely important player in the market. How did the COVID period go? How did the pandemic go for you in the market? And how did kind of your purchasing behavior change? I talk about you generally as Thai people.
All right. Okay. So in Thailand, we had the lockdown in April, May, and June. So basically, like these 3 months, the market were very quiet. Like people in the wholesale market, like the big wholesale market, like the Talat Thai that I'm located in, we still operate. There's no restriction that we can't go to work. But like the each company has their own restriction. Maybe some of them are like 100% work at home. Maybe some of them like 50% work at home. We still go to work. We still went to work every day because we base ourselves as the manufacturing. We had to make the deliveries to the retailers. So for the retail part, we not that much affected, except that if the retailers, they had less demand, then we had less orders. So within that, COVID lockdown, I think like about 5 to 10% of the retailers, less demand, we can see that figures. But for the wholesale market, there's a big impact because the communities, like wet market in each communities, those ones were closed completely. So even though like people in the Talat Thai market, they still can operate, but there will be very, very less traffic or less purchase. So with us, like for the wet market, we had about 50% less sales during these 3 months. So we had like about 3 months lockdown in Bangkok. Then for like purchasing behaviors, I think a lot of people will bought, big bulk purchase, and online they buy a lot online. Like for example, I know some figures, with like Tesco figures, like they were not so actively in the online channels before, but with the COVID lockdown, I think they grown by like 300-400%, can't remember exactly, but huge growth within the online channels themselves. And people still like went to the stores. Sometimes each time they went to the store, they bought like a big purchase, but they didn't want to go too often, like to risk themselves with the COVID infection, something like that.
Sure.
Right.
Now, as is the nature of this this pandemic, it's kind of moving from east to west, and in Cambodia, in Thailand and in China, you're well through it in many ways, and things are kind of back to they're in a new normal situation. And I'd like, if we could then, just to explore a little bit about where things are today. How's the market looking now? Connor, when you look at your figures coming in across from all your depots all throughout China, are you back to where you wanted to be before the pandemic, or are you still off? Are you still down on where you expected to be this time in 2020?
First, we have to be grateful that really China controls this situation very well, that we all benefit from the situation, the controlling. And you can see just after the second quarter and third quarter, the nation GDP all went up a lot. And we just had our national holiday in October, first week, and we had 600 million traveled across the country. And we just had our Double 11 sales, and they went like hundreds of billions of RMB transactions in a few hours. So actually, yes, to answer your question, yes, we are pretty much back to our regular level. Actually, from July onwards, it was even better. So we were joking that China is a country. First, we are very grateful that the government controlled it so well. Second, in China, we are always talking that China is never short of consumption, but this pandemic thing is really making a lot of hit to the consumption phase. That's really what happened. So if we look back to the March, April, when people start to panic a little bit, so they simply stop spending money, they do not go outside, they do not travel, they don't do anything, so they start to worry about their future. But when we move on to do that, everything really slowly becoming very much regular. Can say we don't really wear masks wherever we go, and we don't feel it's necessary, and we feel very safe. And from June onwards, July, if you look at the situation, we actually had one of the best Washington cherry season. The prices went up to historically high, and by August, September, we had another fantastic citrus season. So we are really back.
And do you think this kind of euphoria, the consumers are so happy that they can go out again and spend again, that's one of the reasons why you've seen a growth in sales?
Yes and no. So yes, Chinese people, if we really talking Chinese people, they tend to go travel around if they have the opportunity. That's the thing. If they being forced to stay home for half a year, I would like to go out for sure to spend some money. But also that just like I mentioned, that now I probably feel very comfortable and I will feel a lot confidence that I can keep going with my regular life. I don't really have to cut off my spendings or to save too much money for the future or anyhow. I feel comfortable and safe for the future. So that's actually the real driven why they start to spend money.
Wipui, can I come to you? Have you seen a similar kind of bounce back that we've seen in China?
Let's put it this way, like we see a lot of growth because there were less restriction about how to go shopping and things like that, but also that because Thailand, we are the tourism business-based country, right? And then with the COVID, it's affected a lot of Thailand's main backbone of the business industry. So what we see is for the individuals who still can afford spending, that kind of people, like they remain, their spending is not dropping, but there will be some there will be some portion of the segment of the people that their business got affected because they involved in the tourist business, like they own maybe hostels or the travel agency and things like that. So those people got affected. So maybe they had to cut down on some of their spending. And I think like the fruits probably be one of the categories that they cut their spending. Then for the hotels consumption, that kind of, with all the hotels that they closed down for a long time, and some of the hotels, they probably had to have some fruits or something. So those business also got cut down. So in total, when I see like the total percentage that, come back, it's not yet come back at the same figures that we hope for, but it's not too bad. For me, it's not too bad. For example, like Wat Chumon year to date, all of the all of the segmentations in combined, probably we are talking about negative growth about 5 to 8%. If the pace still going like the same, for the past like last month, we probably end up like got the negative growth by like 5%, something like that. But some of the segmentation that we see that we can do something and drive the business, that segmentation has growth. But some of the segmentation that had got affected, then we can't do so much about that. Yeah.
I've had a question, Wipui, which I've just come to you, and I want to come to Wayne in a second. But John Pandol, who I guess is over in California, so he's watching, in the middle of the night. Thank you for staying up, John, to watch this. He asks that for Thailand, retail was off 10% and wholesale was off 50%. So where did people get their food? And if they got it online, where did the online players get their supplies?
Okay. So for the 50% of the markets that, like they close, then we are talking about fruit because we sell fruits, right? Fruits for them, for these people, for this population is not that priority. So what they want to focus during the lockdown is they want to get like something like that can store like sausage, some frozen pork, some bread, some eggs. Eggs demand shoot like a lot. So the government had to come to restriction that people, like all the farms or the exporters cannot export elsewhere. They have to take care of the domestic consumption first. So for all those like poultry, like pork, beef, whatsoever, chicken, they had a really huge demand because of the lockdown. But for the food itself, it's become something that they don't know if they keep it like for 1 month, for 2 months, they can keep it that long or not. So they don't seem to buy and keep it too much, except the apples. We see that our apples year to date, we had growth. And one of the reasons is because apple is something that all the consumer believe that they can keep it. Citrus, we don't have too much of the drops because they feel that they can keep it also. But during the lockdown, the grapes demand went down a lot because people don't feel that they want to take care of some of the perishable things that can get rotten in their fridge, things like that. So to answer the question, like where do they get the shoppings done? Online growth a lot, like for example, like name like Big C, Tesco, they had like I think like 1,000% growth of the online channels. They can't keep up, how to make the deliveries in time. For the big wholesale markets like Talat Thai or each province, they will probably have the big wet market, that one is still open. But for the small one, like evening shoppings, community market, that one closed. So people will still go to like provincial markets or the like big market, because those markets are not allowed to close, but it's just less demand. So some of the merchants in the market, they were not so active. So maybe some of them still open the shop, some of them close the shops. So yeah, to answer, like wet market is down, but it's not completely closed. The big one still open, just the community small one for snack kind of thing, evening one, those one are not allowed, because it's not like essentials. The market that sells the pork and chicken, the eggs, the fruit, they still open. But fruit is like, if you go to that market, fruit is like maybe three shops within the huge areas that they sell everything. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Wipui. I'll come to Sharif in a second, but Wayne, I just wanted to turn to you. So hearing all of this news, when you go to chart your kind of full year figures, do you think you must be quite encouraged? You can see the statistics were back on track as far as Asia's concerned, because you talked about a dip earlier.
Yeah, certainly a dip, Chris. I mean, one thing working with statistics that sometimes can be, what figure did you have in mind? And I'm hearing some stories that don't exactly add up to the figures that I'm seeing out of the official statistics. But certainly Asia has turned. Some markets have been down more than others. But hearing what we talk about Thailand, and Thailand in the statistics that I have were actually up quite a bit. Now, we got to put in perspective that sometimes the imports are only a small share of the total fresh produce going through the market because of the domestic supply, and that's where the balances may change, and it may have gone in favour of imports in some areas. China, I know, working with some of the industries here in Australia, we've seen increases in some of the industries that we thought would going down. Grapes were up, and stone fruit was up.
Okay, good.
So I think it's going positive again.
That sounds it. That certainly sounds it. Now, we could discuss these things for hours, because the time gallops away, and I see that we've only got about 7 or 8 minutes left. And I wanted to turn and look more about the future and how things are going to change in future and where we go next. And Sharif, I'd like to come to you, because I know you spend an awful lot of your time organising these wonderful in-store promotions that you do with your Chilean growers and exporters, and of course lots of e-commerce promotions and so on and so forth. We heard from Connor earlier about how the way the market has, I mean, we always knew China was a big e-commerce market, but it seems to have gone even bigger in e-commerce. JD.com has been awarded Asia Fruit Retailer of the Year, no surprise, because of its e-commerce work. When you come to promotions and the way you think about your promotions from now and in future, is it going to be much more about how do we promote e-commerce and how do we promote online, or do you still expect to spend a lot of your time thinking about promoting in store?
It's a very good question, Chris. Simply put, we will adapt to the market's reality at the end of the day. We don't impose any type of promotional strategy. We're very, very worried about adapting to the specific market's reality. So, for example, in the case of China, we have seen a rise in e-commerce and especially live streaming. But also we've seen now retailers doing their own live streaming from the actual store, which is something interesting, where they're trying to generate traffic not only online, but also sell offline. In the case of Thailand, I was very interested to hear our colleague from Thailand speak about the market. There we're again adapting to the market's requirements. We're going to be, for the very first time, promoting Chilean cherries in Thailand this coming season. And in fact, we 5 minutes before we started this Congress, we were in a virtual meeting with a colleague from Thailand with a group of almost 10 importers discussing the strategy. How are we going to better promote our Chilean cherries in Thailand? And that's where the importers, distributors, retailers are a key part of this decision process.
Now, Sharif, has this interest in other markets in Asia as a whole, has that been driven even more so by the COVID crisis, or do you think that was going to happen regardless?
No, our exporters in general, for most of the products, we're trying to diversify into different markets in Southeast Asia. That has been something that we've been doing for quite a few seasons. Just as an example, every year before Asia Fruit Logistica, we would do a trade mission to different Southeastern markets to explore opportunities. And this year we repeated it again, but virtually. We just finished also a trade mission, a virtual trade mission, with more than 16 companies, exporters in Chile, meeting up with more than 30 different importers and distributors in the region. So, no, it's a target, it's a goal, a strategic goal of the industry in general.
It's very interesting you mentioned this question about these virtual trade meetings, these virtual things, this virtual thing we're doing here. I mean, so much of our lives has been about actually standing, 2 or 3 feet away from somebody and being able to talk to somebody. Now we're doing it through the miracle of the internet across the world, and yet there's been something lacking. There's been something missing, and there's now been a new word that's been invented called blind trading, I'm told, where importers and exporters can't meet, importers and growers can't meet, and they have to rely on kind of all sorts of virtual platforms to be able to meet. But how has this affected business? I mean, because presumably something we all say about in the fruit business is that we need to be in the market. We need to see our trader or our partner, see the color of their eyes, as it were, and to meet them in the flesh, and to actually to try these fantastic products of ours. Christian, what's your reaction to this? How do you see that working? And is it entirely kind of negative, or do you see many positives to come out of it?
I think if you ask most of our growers and exporters, at the end of the day, obviously they would prefer to be in the marketplace and, as you say, look eye to eye at people, see their products arriving, taste their products, etc. But it's not possible. So we have to adapt. It's as simple as that. And luckily, I think the whole, not only Chile, but the whole fresh fruit industry we've seen has adapted very, very well, very quickly, because I think we're accustomed to rapidly changing. This is an industry that rapidly changes. I mean, today, as I mentioned to you, we're doing virtual meetings, we're doing virtual online webinars, we're getting in contact with people through other different ways that we never thought possible. I'm in my house in Casablanca talking to you on a live congress in London and connected with many people. It's mind-blowing. So I think Chile is adapting. We're committed to keep on going and delivering our fresh and wholesome and safe products throughout the season.
And I imagine for our two friends here from China and Thailand, to Konomu and Wipi Waccharakul, in some ways, I imagine the crisis has been actually not bad for you, in the sense that for an exporter who's sitting the other side of the world, they need somebody that they can trust and rely upon, and that they know. And even though they may not have met you, they've seen you on this, or they know your face, or they know your name. So, a company like Joywing Mao, presumably you expect to get even more customers coming towards you. And the same for you guys at Vachermonde. Connor, what do you say to that?
It's an interesting question. First, yes, and I think Sharif is right. It's because the business is changing so quickly, and we have to adapt to the situation. And although the business changes really quickly, but we were always talking that this business is relying on people. So actually, people do not change very much. So they might have different companies or different exporters to work with, but if I looking back all my years in Joywing Mao, actually they're still them. They're still there. So they still know me, and they still trust us. So that's a very good foundation for the food business here. And the other side, yes, you're right. There's also some new people coming to us, and because they seeking for bigger companies, bigger platforms to make sure that they are more guaranteed with their food, who can be responsible and looking after their food and responsible financially also.
Wipui, the last word for you.
Yeah, for me, I see some benefits, with these like online meetings virtually, because the reason why we want to go there to the site, vice versa, from supplier visit us or we visit the supplier, because we want to make sure that the information is correct, right? But if let's say that we have a very good season, good products, good quality, actually like not going there is actually saving the cost. So vice versa with the suppliers, if you can communicate the accurate information, if you have something that need to be solved, then be frank and then let's discuss it. Then we both save like time to travel, the money to travel. Then actually you can probably actually lower your cost, because I believe that for big companies the traveling cost probably could be like 5%, 3%, 7%, 8%, right? But in case that you have quality problems, maybe you want to be there and you want to be sure that this information with the customer telling you is correct. So that's why you want to be there to see and to witness, maybe to taste it, because if they complain it's not sweet, then you want to taste if whether it's sweet or not, things like that. But as long as if the information is correct, if you have like trusted people to work with, actually like it's not that essential in my point of view, but like it can be taking into the positive side in terms of like doing a cheaper cost. I don't know, that's my point of view. But like if the same cost, whether like the supplier come here to me or not come here to me, then you sell at the same cost, then okay, you can come here to me, so we can meet you in person. But if you say there's two options, like it can be cheaper, maybe a lot of people would rather say like, okay, we can meet in the online kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that perhaps sorry, Christian, did you Sharif, did you want to say?
No.
Oh, sorry, excuse me. I think I agree absolutely with what you've said, and I suspect there are many thousands of heads out there nodding at their computer screens, thinking, yes, she's right. But at the same time, I'm convinced that everybody out there who's nodding at their computer screens thinks, I kind of miss being in the market. I miss the contact with people, and I miss that. And I think what we'll find in future is some kind of hybrid solution where we'll do a lot of this and we'll also do a lot of that. And perhaps those, nonsense meetings, which aren't worth traveling halfway across the world for, will disappear, but the important ones will still be there. I pray that's the case, because I miss all of you and I miss the travel. And I certainly, while Asia Fruit Congress this year has been fantastic to have us all online here, I miss the fact of not rubbing shoulders against one another. I'm hoping, and I'm very confident that when this COVID crisis has been and gone, that we'll all be back together, but we'll probably be talking even more, because we'll be doing a lot of this kind of conversation and a lot of face-to-face conversation, and may that happen very, very soon. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this, our chance to have a chat, our panel session. I'd like to say thank you so much to Sharif Carvajal in Casablanca, to Connor Mu in Shenzhen in China, to Wipui Wacharakorn in Bangkok in Thailand, and last but not least to our friend and resident statsman, to Wayne Prowse there in Sydney, Australia. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you very much indeed for being part of us today. So that concludes this panel discussion, and we go for a recap of what's happening over the next several days. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
was Asia Fruit Congress On. Thank you all so very much for joining. It's been a really insightful Congress again this year, and our hope is that it helps you to grow your business in Asia in 2021. I'd like to thank all of my colleagues for their efforts, but most especially John Hay and his team in Melbourne, and Annalisa Bertacchini and the team here in London, as well, of course, as our friends at Asia Fruit Logistica On in Berlin and in Bangkok. Once again, a huge thank you to our sponsors for their support. Without you, none of this would be possible. Now, the beauty of the internet means that you can watch this all again on demand. It'll be posted on the platform very soon, alongside the streaming of all the other events at Asia Fruit Logistica On. My name is Chris White, that was Asia Fruit Congress, and we look forward to meeting you all again very soon. Goodbye.